So for the first practice exercise, we're going to use App Inventor to create a simple tip calculator. The idea is to explore our App Inventor and get you started in the basics. Um, Now, some of you may have seen App Inventor before. If you've taken our new computer science principles course, we use App Inventor extensively there. But I know some of you haven't used App Inventor, and so this might be new. So we'll go over the basics of App Inventor quickly. Um, if you've already used App Inventor, you can just look at this picture and create the basic app here for your stuff. This is a list picker with a couple number of students, this tip calculator, and there should be text field here to display the tips for it. So let's get started. You can use these links or just Google App Inventor, get to MIT's site. We actually want to go to this part of App Inventor, which is the actual App Inventor. We're going to go to my projects again, and we're going to just do a new project. And I'm going to call this just CIS. Okay, so give it some name. You can't have spaces in the name. The way this is set up, so just give it some name. You start with a simple screen here and a palette over here. So there's user interface buttons, which are most of the buttons over here. There's some additional layout options, media, maps, different things you can click on here, even experimental things like Firebase here that you go, but we'll be just using the user interface stuff today mainly. As you drag things on the screen, it'll show up here in components. So again, the first thing we're going to want is a couple labels at the top. So I'm going to grab a label, put it up there, put another label here, and I'm going to make the first one say tip calculator and then amount of bill, and maybe change some of the font settings on that. So this first one, again, I can click on it here. I see it here. Over here are my properties. So one of the properties is the text. So I'm just going to call this tip calculator. So that'll change what's displayed here. I might also want to adjust the fonts and do some other formatting on it. So maybe I'll want it to be centered and but again, I have to make sure I have the screen selected here. I want to make sure I'm just changing the label here. So I'm going to make sure I have the labels property. And I'm going to work on I'm going to change the font. Maybe I'll kick this up to 24, and maybe I'll make it bold. I want it to span the whole width of this. So for the width, I'm going to say fill parent, and I'll fill that screen here. And I'm going to center that. So now I've got a basic thing here. Now for this next text, I just wanted to say we're going to have them enter the amount of the bill and have a text box underneath them. So I want just amount of bill here. Now none of these I'm going to, be accessing in code yet, but soon I will be getting into some of that stuff. So the next thing we want to add is a text box underneath this. So I'm going to go down here and drag a text box here. And here I might want to start worrying about the names of things. So here, this is going to be the amount text box. So here for that, I'm going to rename this and say, I'm just going to call it txt amount. Now there are different naming conventions that you can use. I'm old and come from an old way where we use a 3-digit extension for or prefix for the type of box. So it's if a text box is txt. But again, nowadays you might want to just call it amount text box or something like that. And different companies will require you to use different standards. We won't necessarily have a fixed standard in this class for this. So I have that set here. Then I'm going to want to, I want to set an initial value of 0 here, and then I want to select a drop-down button kind of here for the number of people. So let me first do some switch. I'm going to make this number only in here for the amount of the bill, and I'm going to call it 0.00 to start with. So that'll be initial stuff. Now, for the number of people, I want to be able to maybe pick a group from a list. I could do another text box again, but again, we're going to want you to explore different things. So let's try a list picker and try what that is. I'm going to drag a list picker here, and then for the text, just change that to something like number and party. Number and party. I'm going to want that to span the whole width here, so I think I'm going to switch that to fill parent on the width. And then we're going to set up what elements are going to be in here. So I'm going to go up here from elements from string, and I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll just have up to 5 people things. So when they click on this in this in your code, it'll bring up a list of 5, or 1 to 5 people they can choose from. So they can select this, kind of like a drop-down box is what just list picker is. Now list view shows everything in a list and is a different sort of stuff, not a drop-down option, but that's useful in other areas. So we've got that. Now we're going to try a couple checkboxes here: normal service, outstanding service. So again, we're just going to try out some checkboxes here. And again, for a lot of these things, I want to watch the names here rather than list picker 1. I might rename it. Maybe I'll just call it list picker number and party. Maybe for checkbox 1, I'm going to just rename it to checkbox normal service. And this one I'm going to call checkbox outstanding service. Again, it helps to name these so when we get into our code, it's a little easy to access. And again, when we get into Android Studio, I'll require you to have meaningful names for all of these objects, at least all the ones that we use in the code area. Okay, so that's these things. Now we're going to have a button. This is actually a button. It looks similar to this, but it's a button to calculate the tip. And then we'll have a couple outputs down here. So we'll drag a button next, and then a couple of, and now I think I'll just use labels to display the text at the bottom. So the button, I'm going to have it display calculate tip. Again, and as you're going through this, I just want you to, experiment with this. You don't have to get everything exactly right. You don't have to worry about getting the wordings exactly the same, just so you have the basic functionality here again for this. Again, I'm going to rename the button and do something more meaningful. The labels here, so I'm going to have a label for the 2 labels, one for displaying the total tip and the tip per person here. So this first one will be total tip, and then so I'm just going to have this say total tip. And I'm going to have this say tip per person. Okay. And then update these labels names appropriately also. Now right now it lays out vertically by default here. Not required, but you can add some layout stuff. So if I wanted like this amount of bill and that to be on one line, I can add a vertical arrangement in here and put that in here. And then I can put these things inside the vertical arrangement. Oh, I did a vertical arrangement. I want a horizontal arrangement, of course. So it's possible to set up these these are. So again, so I just added a horizontal arrangement and put the label and things so they're across here. So it is certainly possible to set those up, but again, it's not required for this course, this assignment. Periodically, I should be saving my project. Hit save project here to save it out here. And now we're going to switch into block view. So there's two tools up here, block view and designer view. So we've been in designer view. Now we're going to switch it over to block view. And this is where we do actual coding by dragging blocks on the screen. So if we look at what we want here, what events do we want to process? It should automatically handle things like the number of people when that display that list, or when they type in things here, when they select the checkboxes. All that should be built into the user interface automatically by App Inventor. What we want to do is when they hit the calculate button, we want to actually do a calculation. So we're going to grab that calculate button. So I'm going to go down here, find my calculate button, button calculate tip. And there are different events here for that. When it gets focuses, when it touches, I'm going to just choose the top one, which is the click event, which is the most common one. I can drag that on the screen and I can do some calculations here. So I'm just going to have them, I'm going to update some stuff. So if I go to my screen in the designer mode, I want to display something in total tip here. So to start with, let's just display something in the total tip, and eventually I want to take the amount here and use that to calculate the total tip, but I'm going to build my way there. So I'm going to set up my total tip. So here's my tip, total tip label. If I click on that, I can set different characteristics, properties, or get certain properties, and there's a text property, so I'm going to do that. I can actually grab any of the ones and just make sure I have it set to the text. So total tip, text, and I'm going to set it to something. For now, I'm just going to go to text and grab some text and say test 1. Okay, so I can see it working there. So now we're going to try to get this running on an actual device. And the first time we do this, it takes a little bit of work to get this to work. But once we get it running, up and running, it works relatively smoothly. So I'm going to go over, assuming you have an Android device to run this on. I'll have a separate tutorial to how you can set up a emulator with App Inventor. So I'm going to go to my Android device and I'm going to download this MIT App Companion. This is a companion app. So just go to Google Store, Google Play Store, whatever. Search for App Inventor or MIT App Companion or something like that, and you'll find this app that you can install on your computer. On your phone or your device. And then you should run that. And then you'll want to go back here to App Inventor, and we're going to connect between the two. So I'm going to go, and for the connection, I'm going to, for now, just go to AI Companion. And that's going to display a barcode here. Now I'm going to go to my device, and I'm going to run. Let's see if I can go back here. I'm going to run MIT's App Companion here, and I'm going to say connect, or I'm going to say scan QR code, and point to my screen and scan the QR code. I get my code there, and then I wait just a sec, and it should bring up the app running. So here's my app running. If I hit calculate tip, it'll say test OK, test 1 OK down there. Now I can leave this running and connected while I do some coding here. And if I change this now and say test 2 OK, I can go back to my app, hit my calculate button again, and it'll have done that. It takes a couple seconds for the code to get transferred to the app, but it should be live. You shouldn't have to redo the connection. If at some point something happens, you can reset the connection, and then on your app, see, There's a little dot dot. I don't think I can bring that up. Um, there's a little. Here, I'll rotate my screen so it'll all fit. There's this little dot 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 here at the bottom, and you can stop the app and reconnect it if you need to at some point. Okay. Okay, so let's look at the next stage. What we're going to actually do is grab the value in this text box. We're going to start by just multiplying by 10% and displaying it down below. So let's see if we can get that to work here. So I'm going to do some calculations here, and I'm going to set my total tip to some value here, not just some text here, but to a value, and I'm going to do a math calculation here. So I'm going to do a multiplication with two things, and I'm going to one thing just get a number. I'm going to multiply. So we're going to assume an initial tip for normal service is like 10%. Or you can do 15% or whatever you want, just some value. I'm just going to do 10 because it helps with the calculations as we're testing. And then I'm going to go out here and get the amount. So I have this txt amount, and I'm going to get, there's lots of values I can get here. Again, there's sets and gets. I want one of these that has a little like puzzle key here, and I'm going to get the amount in the text field. So here's the txt text amount. So this is the text. What's the value that's in the text field of the amount field. I'm going to multiply that by 10% and work on that. So now if I bring up my screen again, if I click on the amount, I can type in 50 here. I've limited it only numbers is one of the options when I created that text field. And then I can hit calculate tip, and it should give me 10% of that, or a 5 down here as a value. And again, I'm not going to worry too much about formatting or things like that right now. Just get you the basics of this. So now let's worry about the number of people in the party, and depending on the number of people party, figure out the tip per person for that. Well, before we go there, let's do one more thing. We have the value here of tip per total tip, and then we put the 5 there. I'm going to add that in here. So I'm setting the text amount, but now I'm going to do what is called a join in text. So under text, I'm going to go to join, and I'm going to join two things together. I'm going to join the words total tip, colon, and then the tip amount here. So now that once I've done that, and I hit calculate tip, it should say total tip and then 5 here. And again, we can worry about formatting that later, but that's just a display as we go. I'm going to add a $sign here though. Okay. So this calculates the total tip. Now I'm also going to do something similar for the tip per person. So I'm going to copy this and duplicate it and change this. Rather than the label total tip, I'm going to go to label tip per person, and here I'm going to change this value to tip per person. And then here I do my calculations, but I also want to divide by the number of people in the party. So if I go down to the list picker number of parties, now it always starts with some events that you can do when that list picker is chosen, and then a list of objects or attributes you can get or set. So these are our getters or setters for all the attributes in this object. And I'm going to want to find the selection. There's both the selection and selection index. In this case, they're probably the same because the selection index starts at 1 and goes 1, 2, 3, 4. And the selection actually, when I typed it in, did the same thing. So I'm just going to grab the selection one here. So I'm going to take the change this calculation, and I'm going to get rid of this here, and I'm going to do a division. I'm going to go to math and then do a division here. And I'm going to get the amount of the previous label. So I'm going to go into the total tip text amount. I'm going to take whatever, that's what we calculated up here, and then we're going to divide it by the number of people, the selection of that. I'm going to get rid of this. So that should calculate the tip per party. So then I can go over here and see how I'm doing here. And we see that's not quite working. Let's try to figure out what's wrong with that. So when I'm running this now, if I type in some value here, I select the number of people in my party. Let's say there's 2 of us paying, and I hit calculate tip. I'm going to get an error message displayed. I don't think it's showing up on your screen, but it says there's an error, and I'm trying to divide a string that says total tip and then the number. So my problem is that I'm actually displaying, I'm just grabbing this whole text here, and I can't do that because it has total tip and then the amount. So I'm going to want to redo this calculation here. So I'm going to get rid of this part. Here's my, trying to divide total tip by 2 here. And that's the error. So I'm going to have to just redo this calculation. I'm going to take this calculation again, copy and paste it, and do it this way since I've added that. So I'm going to take the total amount, multiply it by 10%, and then divide by the number of people. And then so I've typed 44, selected 2 people in the party, and then hit calculate tip. And so total tip is $4.04, and the tip per person is $2.20 for that. Last thing I want to worry about is this normal or outstanding service here, and I'm going to, depending on what they check, I'm going to do some things. And what I'm going to use is a global variable for that. So I'm going to go up here and choose variables and initialize a global variable and call it tip percent. And I'm going to set it equal to 0.1 or 10% to start with. And then here, rather than saying this amount, I can, if I go over here, I'm just going to get the this tip percent. It says global.tip percent and use that. Similarly down here, I'm going to get rid of that and grab my tip percent and put it down here. So now it still should work the same. When I run this, it still should do the same sort of calculations. If I change this number here, and hit calculate, it'll do my calculation for me here. So that's still working as is, but now when let me go to my designer, when I click normal or outstanding service, I want to change that property. So I'm going to just go down here, and here's my checkbox outstanding service, and there are different events when it's changed. Get focus. I'm going to worry about when it's changed here. So I could do a big if then here and set that up, or I could do it when I change the checkbox. And again, there's different options for doing it. I'm going to show you just multiple events, so I'm going to do it here, but we could just as well have put a if then here. So maybe I'll talk about both ways, but I'll just do it here. So when the checkbox outstanding is changed here, I'm going to do a check. So I'm under control. I'm going to do an if then option. So if, and I'm going to go back to my checkbox outstanding service and see if it's checked. So there's a checked option. So if it's checked, if this is checked, that's true, then I'm going to want to set my global variable. So again, I go up here, set global variable. And again, you just have to make sure I'm grabbing the right things. All these, there's going to be a setter, a setter and a getter. So make sure you're grabbing the setter or the getter at the right time. So I'm going to grab that, and then I'm going to go into math and grab a number and set it to 20% here. Now that we've done some testing, I'm going to switch this back to 15% for a normal tip, and then 20% for an outstanding tip here that they run. Okay, so now when they run this, if they enter some values here, if it's a normal tip, it'll do this calculation. If they choose outstanding service and calculate, it'll do a higher tip. And if it's not checked, it should do the lower tip for that. So, but you might notice that if I uncheck the outstanding tip and recalculate, it doesn't do anything. It still is that way because, again, when I did my if statement, I don't have an else. It only sets it. It doesn't ever set it back to the old value. So now there's a little gear here I can click on some of these areas, and I can add things. So I'm going to add an else. Drag this else bar up here, and I'll add a little tool here for else. I'm going to copy this and paste it down here and do set it back to 15% as the other value. So now, if nothing's selected, it should use 15% as the tip, and if outstanding service is selected that way. And I can do the same thing for normal service. Now that I look at it, I have both these selected, and I'm thinking I only need one. So I'm going to go back to my interface here and actually get rid of this normal service. I'm going to assume normal service. I'm going to delete that and just have an outstanding service option there. So you enter your bill amount, you enter the number of parties, and then you can select outstanding service or not. So we go here, we can enter the amount of the bill, so $55 and 42 cents, and there were 3 of us that are paying, splitting this bill up. It was outstanding service, and I can calculate those values here. So that's the final routine that I have. And again, there are different ways. Right now I'm doing this with this inside here. I could also just move this if-then statement probably up here and done it in different ways. Again, there's options that you can choose from. But this is the final layout. So see if you can create an app, something like this. Now to save this and to submit this, I want you to submit a file so I can look at it. So go up to projects. I'm going to save this project, but then go up and do a export AIA file. And this is what you'll be submitting, is this AIA file. You'll submit that, and I can load that up and view that for this.